Strength training content on YouTube has often switched between being overcomplicated and being oversimplified. With the desire to be optimal or most effective, many people will fall prey to paralysis by analysis and not train hard enough. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who have the desire to be the hardest worker in the room and will put on load on the bar when they're not ready for it just because they've been told to train harder than last time. And despite all the effort in the world, they fail to progress. We all know training heavy is important to getting stronger. We also know that max effort, high frequency training is unfeasible. In today's video, we will be answering the question, how heavy should I train to get stronger? So if strength is important to you, then this, as well as many other videos on this channel, is just for you. My name is Cross King, StandStrength.com. On my website, you can find my online power building coaching services, as well as the preferred fitness apparel of the strong and the self-starters. So let's get into the video. How heavy should you train to get stronger? One thing that needs to be understood is the fact that the most specific thing that you can do to get better at powerlifting, meaning you're increasing your 1 rep max in the squat, bench, and deadlift, is heavy singles. But training like this in the long run will not yield you significant gains. The reason being, obviously we know that there is the specific adaptations to impose demands, and you want to train in a way that is highly specific to the outcome you're trying to train for. However, if you were to solely do heavy singles, what you're going to do is you're only going to be able to display the strength you've already built up and not gain any new strength. And why? So there's a couple of reasons. First, strength is a neurological adaptation, meaning your nervous system. And muscle size is just a factor. One thing that is kind of ignored, and this is something that I was guilty of ignoring, is you're not just your muscle system. Obviously, like the concept of overtraining is, in my opinion, a bit overstated, but at the same time, it's not something we can just flat out ignore either. If your nervous system is going to, like, your nervous system is kind of like the governor or the dictator of your body, basically, right? And if it decides that you are not lifting heavy today, you are not lifting heavy. So with the neurological adaptations, that includes muscle fiber recruitment, firing rates, intramuscular coordination, and these are all things that are involved and built upon when you lift heavy loads. But like I said, if your nervous system decides you are burnt out, you have too much stress on the body, you've put your body through too much stress and it has not yet recovered in that way, you're not lifting anything heavy, you're not getting stronger. Obviously, there's other components such as genetics and leverages that will dictate your strength, but those are things that are outside of our control and are usually things that we don't really consider too much in our programming. So what should be something that you keep in mind with your strength training then? Strength training has to progressively decrease protective inhibition, meaning you should go through phases of high amounts of work that potentiate strength development and then going into a peak. So base strength, so building a base, starting out with lighter weights and doing more volume and increasing that over time to your peak. Reason why you want to do this is because the body doesn't really care about how good you look. It doesn't really care how much weight it has to lift. The thing is, it will try to always protect you because the main function or the main goal of the body, separate from yourself, is to survive. So when you are lifting these heavy loads, it can definitely increase the risk of injury, and that's not really productive toward the goal of survival. So it will try to inhibit you and inhibit your strength. So if you build up over time how heavy you go, your nervous system will become more primed to lift these heavy weights and know that it is safe, and then you're able to deliver your best effort onto the platform. The next point that I need to point out is the fact that strength does have a technical component. If your main goal is the 1 rep max, but your technique is total ass and you just do max effort work all the time, you are not getting stronger. Heavy lifting is a skill because the heavy weight will push you out of position, and you need to make sure you have the discipline, the form, and the long body of work that will allow you to keep your form as optimal as it can be in that circumstance. So you need to learn how to lift heavy, but you also need to learn the power lift movements. The squat, bench, and deadlift are not the most technical movements in the world, but there is a learning curve, and people have to practice them to get better. Same way you would practice an instrument, same way you would practice a sport. So this is why I make an argument for higher frequency in training, because if your main goal is solely hypertrophy, yeah, sure, you can do a body part split, but in my opinion, it's not the most effective way to train. But I do think that all programs should have a strength component in them, and a body part split just does not do that all that well, or like at least a bro split or a pro split. But also, because there is a technical component to strength and you need to practice that movement more, frequency has a part in that. It's kind of like with studying, right? You are more likely to retain information if you study it regularly rather than if you just do it one time. So it's important because like the skill or the knowledge will kind of decay over time exponentially, and the same thing applies, in my opinion, to your form. So that's why it benefits you to do high frequency training. Now you might bring up, let's say, like maybe the Lilla Bridges or like some other powerlifters who do the lifts one time per week in their program. And what I have to say with that is this: they might do the squat, bench, and deadlift or a close variation one time per week, but think about all the other work that they do and all the other work that will build up their ability in those movements. The other thing that I would bring up is more than likely they didn't start day one only doing it one time. They probably spend some time getting the frequency in so that way they can actually learn the technique and benefit from the movement. So that's the second point. And the final point is they're the fucking Lily Bridges. They're strong as shit. And like that's why I was saying, like, don't we have to be very mindful about just kind of keeping an eye on our training practices and what we implement into our program, because that's what's going to be useful to us. We don't know how much of their strength just came from the fact that they are I'm pretty sure they're enhanced, but I'm not going to say, but also just like their genetics too. Like you don't really know those things. So those are things that you just need to kind of experiment with in your own training and just try to get as strong as you can be. All right. So the next thing, because frequency is going to be kind of moderate or high, intensity should be undulated and volume has to match appropriately. So in this example, if you are going to be doing low reps, you should be doing high sets to make up for the lack of volume. And then that allows you to use heavier loads. If you're going to be using lighter loads, then it makes sense to do less sets and more reps per set. That's kind of like the most standard way of training. This is what you see in almost every strength training program, any bodybuilding program. The next question you might have is strength training, or is it necessary to go to failure for strength? And the short answer is no. I don't advocate going to failure for strength progression or strength training. I think if you fail a lift, that means you're going too hard. That means you are not training appropriately. Proximity to failure is really important for hypertrophy, but it's not necessary for strength development. Reason being is because if you fail a lift, that doesn't mean the next session you're going to suddenly have the ability to hit it next week. Like if you hit it, it's probably due to other factors that you're not really accounting for. It's not due to the quality of your program. You don't want to be failing lifts. You don't want to be missing reps. You don't want to be missing weights during your prep, during your buildup. RPE and RIR can be used to kind of gauge your training effort, but it's not something I would really worry about too much, because obviously this is something that my coach had told me, and how you feel is a lie. You need to really go into the gym and think to yourself, I'm going to get stronger. Obviously there's a element of auto-regulation and decision making that you can have, but generally speaking, if you got it done, then you need to just build upon that. So even if it feels kind of hard, give it a try first. Don't sell yourself. Don't sell your. She shall buy. Don't sell yourself short. Really give it a good try before you do anything, because you need to remember workouts should start easy and get harder. That's what she said. That you need to build up. You need to go until things get difficult, and when they do get difficult, because they inevitably will, because you were lifting heavy weights, you don't panic. You keep going, you drop down the volume, and go from there. The next thing I want to kind of bring up is form. So if you're a bodybuilder and you're trying to increase your strength, one thing you don't want to do is change your form so drastically that you now are biasing only strength rather than actually feeling the muscle. Powerlifters want to lift in a way that is safe and efficient to lift loads to competition standards. This is why we have seen things like the zero range of motion bench press, which is like just abhorrent. But that's why we've seen it, because people are lifting within the rules of their competition. But for the bodybuilder, you want to lift in a way that is safe but effective at targeting the muscle. So that's why for me, my bench press form is usually like, I don't have the most extreme arch because I still want to get stronger on that movement, but I also want to like be safe enough, but at the same time, when I'm building up that strength, it's going more towards that bodybuilder style form, right? So you need to choose the form that best serves your final goal. So if you're a bodybuilder, don't start doing things like having an extreme arch to get more weight on your bench press. Don't be doing things like hinging your squats to get more weight into your squat. Don't be doing stuff like that. You need to make sure that you're always training the muscle first, because you're a bodybuilder. But if you're a strength athlete, you want to really optimize your form so that way in competition, you can lift the most amount of weight. Or in the gym, you can lift the most amount of weight and like recover so that when next training session you can push hard again. So now let's look at what the science and the experts say for the actual question of how heavy should you train. Dr. Mike Israetel from Art Renaissance Periodization has a great video on this topic, and basically, to boil it kind of down, 80 to 92% definitely builds strength. If you go below that, it does build strength. It has strength carryover, but it's more suited for hypertrophy. And if you go above 92%, then it definitely builds strength, but it's too difficult to accumulate enough volume to actually produce a noticeable result over time. Let me just check the time real quick. And then also, it's disproportionately fatiguing. You are going to accumulate a lot more fatigue with those heavy ass loads than if you were with sub-maximal loads. The next thing is that the joints and connective tissues will take a huge beating as a result of these heavy loads. Next, it's essential for strength training to go above 92%, but here's the thing. That is a peak. You cannot use your peak as a place to kind of build off from. You do need to drop back down, build up a body of work, because the tallest buildings have the biggest base. And every now and then, once you get to the peak of your strength, you need to go back down, build a wider base with that new strength you've gained as leverage, and then boom, you can hit higher peaks. The other expert I want to mention is Christian Thibodeau, where he mentions 87 to 92% of your 1 rep max build strength. And this is a really tight range. And one thing I want to ask you is, if we know that strength is going to be built within these ranges, should you train in them all the time? I would argue no, and we'll get into that in the next slide. But anyway, above 92% displays strength. It helps you demonstrate your strength. It helps increase all those neurological adaptations that we mentioned earlier. And this is why max effort training seems so effective if what preceded before that was submaximal training with super high volumes. Because now you already did all this work with your muscles, and now you're doing something with your nervous system, and that's what's really effective about the max effort system or max effort method and other aggressive wave type or wave loading type programs such as 531. They make you seem like you're getting these crazy PRs out of nowhere, but really you're just demonstrating the strength that you built up in previous training. And then you'd probably do something of 4 to 6 sets for 3 to 5 reps. So more sets, less reps, heavier weights. That's kind of what is being advocated here by Christian Thibodeau. And this is what I have found to work in the gym for myself, as well as for some friends and my clients. The number one thing I need to point out, though, is that you do not ignore the science. If the science is cohesive, coherent, and it is, like, let's say, reliable, so, you know, multiple trials, meta-analysis, the studies were done in a way in which, like, the results, like, actually make sense, because you can skew things if you justify if you change the definitions of certain things and measure things by certain variables, but these things don't make sense, and you produce certain results, that can kind of eliminate the validity of the study. So it's kind of important to think that to know that the studies on strength and muscle size, you shouldn't take them at face value ever. But at the same time, we do know, or that isn't to say science is just all bad. The thing is, like, we just take it, we've done a horrible job at taking it too far. So you don't ignore the science, but you don't make a training program just based on studies. That's why I really find it really weird when there's programs that's like the most scientifically backed workout program. And I'm just like, by who? By whose standards? Who reviewed it? Do you know the scientific process? Because if that were the case, then this should be a program that was 10 years in the making. So regardless of the training split, the frequency, the periodization approach, and all of that, you need to think to yourself, I need to get bigger, I need to get stronger. Strength feeds size, and size feeds strength. So when it comes to what works in the gym, it's not so much of, oh, these loads work better, these loads work better. The thing is, like, a lot of these studies are, like, say, 12-week studies. The thing is, you need to be thinking to yourself, are you only going to be working out for 12 weeks? No. That's why you need to kind of, like, think about things in a more holistic way. You don't need to overcomplicate things and start going into, like, macro cycle, mesocycle, and microcycle or anything like that nature. But at the same time, you shouldn't be just limiting yourself to thinking, well, in a 12-week study, this is how they built up more strength. And I was like, and then you're just going to do that every 12 weeks. It's not going to really work out all that well for you if you were to go about that. The best source of strength information I have personally found on YouTube is Alexander Bromley, Matt Winning, Dave Tate, and I think that's about it. No, Candido. How can I forget about Candido? And of course, Alex from Alpha Destiny. Brian Alsdrew is good for the more conditioning side to make sure you're not just a fat powerlifter. But generally speaking, for the concepts of base building and peaking, I do think that a lot of great strength content has come from them. A more recent addition to this, who I have worked with, like I hired him as a coach, is Faz Lifts. Great guy, great coach. You can definitely learn a lot from any of those people. So any credible strength coach will tell you you need to build a base and then peak. So what does that tell you? If the experts of the field, if the best athletes and the best coaches within that sport, in that field, all unanimously agree that there is some value in training in like this, it's more than likely to go that way. Now, obviously, there's always going to be that West Side guy who's just like, well, what about Louis Simmons and the West Side guys? They built so much world records and stuff. The issue here is that they basically took a carton of eggs, smashed it up against the wall, and then the eggs that didn't break became your world record holders. And the thing is, you don't want to try that out on yourself. So what works in the gym is quite simply this: starting light. Start at around 60 to 65% of your wonder max, and you might be thinking to yourself like, oh my god, that's too goddamn light. Why am I doing such light work if my goal is to get stronger? Getting stronger is a progressive process. What does that mean? It means you need to start from somewhere and build up to something else. The thing is, if you start all the way up at your peak, where do you go from there? You're not a fucking spaceship. You actually need to kind of build things up over time. So this lighter, higher volume work will build your work tolerance and build your ability to recover from the heavy training. That's why it's super important to build a base. Meaning, the early phases should be lighter, higher volume, build up that muscle, because like I said, size will feed your strength, and size is a result of more volume and stuff of that nature, right? So all of that will just feed into your ability to handle that heavy loads. So in a concurrent model or a concurrent training program, like how I have been training for the past couple of years, then I have strength days and size days. With these strength days, I recommend that you use sub-maximal loads for higher reps and build up in volume until you need to drop the volume down to continue adding more weight. So generally speaking, what I would do is 1 to 8 reps for the main work in around the 60 to 90% range. So let's say I'm starting at 60% for 8 reps. Then I go up to 65% and I'm still at 8 reps. And then we just kind of go from there. And once I can no longer hit 8 reps at whatever percent I'm at, then I go down to maybe 6 or 5 or something of that nature, right? And then for the supplemental movements, I won't go above 80% because I actually want to make sure that I'm able to hit a heavy enough load to stimulate muscle growth, stimulate some strength progression, but at the same time recover, so that way the next time when I have to do my heavier loads the next strength day, I'm able to hit it. And then for the accessories on the strength day, I will do accessories to about 1 rep shy of failure, and that's really what all you need to be thinking about. Let's say with the tricep extension, a bicep curl, just go 1 rep shy of failure. You don't really need to overthink like, oh, what's the percent of my bicep curl? I think that's kind of like overthinking it at that point. Like, you need to be kind of precise on your strength training because that's something you need to track and measure over time and be consistent with. But when it comes to your bicep curl, you just need to make sure you're going in with the intention of pushing to your absolute best on that movement and then just going home. The next thing you want to consider on your strength training days is the fact that you should have an exercise selection that is more specific to strength. On a strength day, a fly does not make sense. A dumbbell bench press does, because there is a lot more carryover from, or direct carryover from, a dumbbell bench press than there is from a fly. Same thing goes for, like, let's say a deadlift. What is going to benefit your deadlift more, a good morning or a hamstring curl? So on strength days, you want to be thinking about that. Now let's go into the size days. Here, you want to train sub-maximally and progress closer to failure. So like I mentioned earlier, let's say you start at 4 reps in reserve. So that's usually like right when it starts to feel a little heavy, the rep slows down. Week 1, that's where you stop. Then the next week, you go slightly beyond that. Then maybe 3 reps in reserve, 2 reps in reserve, 1 rep in reserve. That's one way of you can go about your size training. Another way is just push to failure every time. The issue with this is if you don't spend enough time building up your tolerance to volume, and you do that when you are basically reaching your peak with your heavy work, it's not going to end up all that well for you. So that's why, generally speaking, the closer I am to, let's say, my peak weights on my strength days, the further from failure I am on my size days, just so that I can maintain my tolerance to volume and improve my recovery. But the further I am from my peak on the strength days, I'm actually closer to failure on my size days. That's kind of how I kind of go about it, but there's a bunch of different ways that I found works, and I tried it out with some of my clients who have specific preferences. But generally speaking, just making sure that you're not doing super high, your peak weights, like 90% of your max, and then going to failure later that week. It just won't work out that well for you. So 5 to 10 reps or an AMRAP with submaximal loads up to 80% will go for the main work on the size days, and then 6 to 12 reps on supplemental work. So supplemental work being specific exercises that will help build up the lift or the specific muscles using them, and then accessories just your bodybuilding stuff. And like I mentioned just previously, reps should drop over time, so that way you're not going super high and heavy and pushing super close to failure with super high reps at the exact same time within your training week. That's not what I recommend at all. So with this, it's really important to know that if you are going to go with a more phasic approach, then what you'll do is that each day will be a strength day and each day will be a size day. But the thing is, you need to undulate the intensities a little bit more, and we'll go kind of more over that in the programming series. So this is kind of like a graph of how I would describe my progression, generally speaking, when it comes to how I would train for like power building, right? So at a certain point, in most programs, so let's say like your starting strengths of the world, your strong lifts, grayscale LP, what ends up happening is that volume starts high. So volume starts high and intensity is low. For me, I agree with Alexander Bromley's point where it kind of never really made sense to me that volume should be at its highest when you are the least conditioned to high volume. That's why for me personally, what I would recommend is that volume and intensity should raise at the same time in the same program. And once you can no longer, and this is just for the strength days or your strength progression, and once you can no longer increase, intensity and volume can no longer increase together, you drop volume so that way intensity can continue climbing. And then you hit a new PR and you repeat this process over time. That's kind of my way, and that's kind of like what I found works over time for like the past couple of years that I've been training. So this kind of brings us back to the question, how heavy should I lift to get stronger? For size, you should lift as heavy as you can manage and progress from. You want to increase your proximity to failure with these heavier loads. And that's, so once you can, like, let's say for example, like you're hitting 135 and you find that you're hitting it and you're getting further from failure despite hitting the same weight, you should add weight. Now for strength, you want to do something completely different. You want to actually start with light loads, 60 to 65%, build up the work capacity. So start, let's say, with like maybe 3 sets of 10 or 3 sets of 8, then like adding up weight over time, keeping it at 3 sets of 8, or maybe even trying to get 3 sets of 10, maybe doing like a double progression system. And then once you can no longer add load and keep that volume there, drop the volume so that way you can continue making strength gains, because much of your strength development will come from the 80 to 92.5% range, but being able to work in this range has to be preceded by these lighter workouts to be maximally effective. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you like the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you are interested in coaching, you can sign up for coaching on my website, as well as find this sick-ass t-shirt. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is King, standstrength.com, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.